Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our talks with Walt as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a little poem at the conclusion, near the very last poem of Drum Taps, called Lo Victress of the Peaks. Lo Victress on the Peaks. This is poem number 39 of the 43 of Drum Taps, again, right to the end. I want to remind us that in To Thee, O Cause, a poem early on in Leaves of Grass, Whitman said, "My book and the war are one." And I've been talking about how that Leaves of Grass is a sustained theodicy, an explanation for the pain and suffering of America and especially the war. Why did we have to go through it? And I think here we're going to get another kind of interpretation of that theodicy. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, everything from inscriptions on. And there's a lot of echoes from those poems and the inscriptions poems in this poem. We've given a set of introductory comments to Drum Taps, and then we just finished with Certain Civilian. Now, our Norton's background information here will tell us that this poem was one of the sequel poems of 1865-66 and was placed with minor revisions in the group Bathed in War's Perfume in 1871 and 76 and returned to Drum Taps in 1881. Victress, or Libertad, is of course the poet's personification of freedom. We've seen this already in terms of Libertad in earlier poems in Leaves of Grass. This is one of the poems in which Whitman seems to have developed a pattern of line lengths which corresponds to the undulation of the thought. And I do want us to kind of see this. The syllables and the repetition of syllables will give us a certain kind of almost like ebb and flow. And we've seen Whitman doing and playing this game a few times. Let's enjoy the poem. Lo, Victress on the peaks, where thou with mighty brow regarding the world, O Libertad, that vainly conspired against thee, out of its countless beleaguering toils, after thwarting them all, dominant, with the dazzling sun around thee, flauntest now unharmed in immemorial soundness and bloom. Lo, in these hours supreme, no poem proud I chanting bring to thee, nor mastery's rapturous verse, but a cluster containing a night's darkness and blood-dripping wounds and psalms of the dead. I find this a compelling little poem to try to speak about what the poet of the Civil War is going to say about that Civil War. Now, this use of the word lo we've seen a number of times already in Leaves of Grass. It's a word of reverence. It's a religious word. It's certainly a word that's going to be involved in a lot of the hymns that Whitman's audience would have sung in church and know. Notice Victress is going to be playing the feminine idea of victory and, of course, freedom. On the peaks will suggest that we're back now on the mountaintops. We were in the valley, now we're on the mountaintops. Where thou with mighty brow. This is very Greek-like language. It's very Homeric-like language regarding the world. It's almost like a bird's eye view. In other words, now, because of the horrors of the war, the valleys, we have gone through the valleys. Now we're on the mountain looking down at everyone else. In other words, for Whitman, and again, this is part of his theodicy, he will think of the war as the way to define America's greatness. Not its weaknesses, but rather its greatness. And then in parenthetics, and we've seen these parenthetics, they're important for Whitman. The world, O Libertad, we've seen this already. I think he got this from Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, let facts be submitted to a candid world, a watching world. He's mentioned this a number of times in these poems, that he feels like the world is watching and America has been performing for the world. O Libertad, again, back to starting from Pomanak 3, where we saw that word Libertad for the first time. That vainly conspired against thee. This is his theodicy. The rest of the world was hoping that we, America, would fail, and a house divided against itself can't stand. And guess what? The house stood. Wow. In other words, it's a fascinating way to read Lincoln's suggestion that he borrows from, of course, the Gospels, the idea that we cannot go through the Civil War and come out on the other side and still be a united country. Whitman is going to argue, au contraire. In fact, liberty is going to be the strongest after this experience. Notice he says it, out of its countless beleaguering toils, and that's what we've been reading, of course, in drum taps. That's significant that those references in those poems are so pointed, the pain and the suffering. After thwarting them all, dominant, with the dazzling sun around thee, takes us back to Song of Myself 46, you must have it yourself to the dazzle of the light. Dazzling sun around thee. Flauntists now unharmed, and this will be, of course, one of the sticking points of Whitman's theodicy. Not only is he going to argue that we had this war and we made it through, but we're unharmed, that liberty is unharmed, that it didn't really hurt American democracy to go through the experience of the war. Flauntists now unharmed, immortal soundness and bloom. And as I said to you guys, I think Whitman's having so much fun writing these poems. I'm having fun pointing points out to you, like, what does it mean that he uses the word blooms in a volume called Leaves of Grass? It's quite a remarkable, I think, tour de force, the way he drops these little kind of vignettes in, right? Soundness and bloom. And then, again, the hyphen that we always think of our Emily Dickinson when we see these hyphens, huh? Lo, in these hours, supreme. In other words, he sees the end of the war as a supreme moment. A moment of validation. Again, his theodicy. And he says it. No poem proud. And notice the wording here. No poem proud. I, chanting, bring to thee. In other words, the war has humbled me. No question. And we see this in our study of drum taps. We'll begin with all this excitement and exultation about what's to come. But by the end, notice he'll say, I'm not going to say that I'm proud of what's happened. However, he'll say, it is about the mastery, nor mastery's rapturous verse. In other words, I'm not going to play Virgil and just sing about the glories of war. I'm not going to do it. He says, I'm not going to do it. But I will provide a cluster. And again, we've seen this word already, the use, the value of this word. And it is I think, an agrarian term as well, cluster, to come together, to grow together, containing night's darkness and blood-dripping wounds. We've seen this in drum taps already a number of times. And psalms of the dead. I think he intentionally uses the word psalms and not songs because he wants to point out the idea of not just the dead, but the idea of resurrection. I think the myth of the phoenix bird stands behind this. I think the Christian idea of resurrection stands behind so much of what he is suggesting here. In other words, from all of that blood, from all of that darkness comes new life and comes survival, right? And out of the darkness into the light. At 2a, I think the argument that he's making, and again, it's another permeation on his theodicy, is that the war was actually necessary for growth, almost like a pruning type of thing for the growth of the democracy. At 2b, again, notice we'll start with the 6 syllabic lines, move to 20, and then back to 5. So there's almost like this ebb and flow. It's quite a remarkable thing, the way that he is playing around with language to emphasize the very thing he's saying in his poem itself. At 3a, I think it's significant to go back to Tom Jefferson's comment to William Smith that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. He said that in 1787. By the way, the next exact line right after that is, it is its natural manure. And I think these are lines that Whitman would have understood. I think he's trying to make a very similar kind of argument. For the tree of democracy to grow, there was the necessity of all of this pain, all of this suffering. In other words, it was propedeutic. It was valuable. You'll remember in Turno Libertad that as we're coming to the end of drum taps, when we get to Turno Libertad, we're going to be playing a very similar kind of idea here when we finish. Finally, at 3b, do you buy Whitman's theodicy here that the necessity of the war is the only way that democracy grows strong? And that is, in fact, in our struggles that America becomes its strongest. Do you buy that idea as you're studying drum taps? Thank you.